My name is Laura, and I'm going to be the one conducting this training class along with Geneva, who you just saw. This is going to be a 4-hour training class, so get comfortable, but not too comfortable, right? So you're here to learn quite a few things. So when you walked in today, you received an election handbook, along with some inserts that were a quiz and also an attendance card, and also what's new at this election. So there's quite a bit that's new at this election, but we're pretty much going to cover all of it. Now, the election is March the 17th, which is St. Patrick's Day, and that is our primary election date, and that's the date that you'll find here on the front cover. I want you to look at the back outside cover page. So those are important telephone numbers that you might use. So if you see the very first phone number listed, that's Election Central. So Election Central is the hotline for Election Day only. Everybody calls that number. Election judges, poll watchers, civic organizations, political parties, campaigns, candidates. Everybody calls and will either file a complaint or ask a question or what have you. So that's the hotline for Election Day. I want you to look at the number right below that. That's for equipment and supplies. So equipment and supplies is exclusively just for that. If you are missing supplies or lacking or ran out of supplies, or there's something going on with your equipment that, maybe it needs repair or something's going on, you have your own specific number for that so that you can get attention quickly. I want you to look below that, and you're going to find department numbers. Departments like the Judges Department, vote by mail, registration. So again, you can use all those numbers at any given time. So from that, let's just proceed. And we always use this handbook. I want you guys to read this entire handbook all the way through, from this page all the way to that page. But I also I know that you're not going to retain the information, and nobody expects you to. So you have to bring this handbook with you on Election Day so that when you're setting up your setting up your equipment and supplies, you're using the instructions. When you're processing a voter and something goes wrong and you need more direction, you have the instructions here in the handbook on how to tell you how to further, look for them in the poll book. And then, of course, when you're transmitting the election results and closing the polls, you have to follow those instructions. So again, read the whole book, but follow the instructions that you have in this handbook throughout all of Election Day. When you open your very first page, you're going to see our general information on the left-hand side. So if you need to share that information with any voters or yourself or friends or family, go right ahead. I want you to look on the right-hand side, page 1. It says, Dear Poll Worker. So that is a very nice, sincere letter from our Executive Director, Mr. Lance Goff, and he's thanking you for your service as an election judge, right? For taking the time out of your busy schedule to do a wonderful civic duty. So thank you very much. That brings us over to page 2, Election Judges and Coordinators. So it's just showing you how a precinct is comprised. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but before we do that, I want you to turn to page 3. And if you look on the right, on the very first couple paragraphs, it explains how precincts are comprised in Illinois. So in Illinois, you have 2 leading vote getters of the state, 2 leading political parties. That is Democratic and Republican. So now there's other parties involved in elections sometimes, like a Libertarian Party or Green Party. However, they're not the leading vote getters of the state. So the leading vote getters of the state are the ones that have poll workers within the precincts running them. So if you're in an even number precinct, you are going to have 3 Democratic judges and 2 Republican. If you're in an odd numbered precinct, it's going to be vice versa. You're going to have more reps than you do Dems. So the magic number to always remember is 5. That's how many you should have. However, if we are in compliance with the student judge program or language assistance, we will sometimes, if there's already a full complement of election judges, we'll allow for there to be more judges than 5, okay? And that's only in those unusual circumstances. So looking on page 3, I want you to look at the third very short paragraph down. It talks about your money. So election judges have received somewhat of a raise. So your regular straight up stipend for working on Election Day is $170. So that's how much you will receive just for working on election day. Now, if you don't work on election day, you don't receive anything, so you do have to complete that task of working on election day. Also, all of you in this room have already served in previous elections, so you've already complied, and you receive an additional $60 for the training that you already accomplished. Now, you receive $25 additional for today's training class. Now, there's other ways that you can receive $25 extra stipends, and it's for these particular reasons. So there's only one election judge of the precinct of 5 election judges that is asked to pick up the key that opens up that big blue election supply carrier. That judge picks it up the Friday or Saturday before the election, and they receive an additional $25. Now, we also have the election coordinator pick up an envelope that has the same thing, the key and the wire cutters. And the reason we do that is because it's a backup plan in the event that one of them were not going to show up. So at least now we know that the precinct can get into the supplies and set up the polling place without that key judge. So again, election coordinators and an election judge have the keys. Also, we have a cell phone judge. So the election coordinator must bring their cell phone, but we do ask one judge of the precinct of 5 to bring their cell phone, and if they say yes, their cell phone has to be used for everything. So if they have a question, concerning processing a voter, they use that cell phone, even if it's not their question, right? Or if there's a voter that has to use the phone, we say, all right, go ahead and use the cell phone judge's phone. And same thing if we have to respond or give a call to the precinct, we will use that number. They receive an additional $25 for that inconvenience. Also, there are 2 judges, one of each political party, that are supposed to return 2 roller bags. It's a black roller bag as well as a transfer case to a receiving station, which is a Chicago public school. We give each of them a $25 additional. Now, a high school judge or an election coordinator, they are not allowed to return supplies. Okay, so it has to be the other components of election judges. I want you to look in the middle of the page on page 3. I want you to look at that note. It says everyone is responsible for their own food and drink on election day. You should plan to bring or buy what you need for the whole day. So the election day is about what? Let's say 14 hours. So please, you know how much you can put away in those hours, whether it's water or Gatorade or coffee or snacks or sandwiches. Please make sure that you bring those items with you. Now, you may encounter a precinct in which a precinct captain or an alderman or a committeeman or some other entity will try to bring in food, right? They'll send in donuts or coffee or sandwiches. Nobody is obligated to do that. Are you allowed to eat the free food? Well, I would say yes, but if there's any electioneering signs on it, like vote for Laura for mayor, you have to remove those, and then you can, enjoy the free donuts or what have you. But anyway, bring your own food regardless, just so you know that you're covered. I want you to look where it says your assignment on election day. So most of you in this room should have already received your assignment. And we also, at least 10 days before the election, send you a letter, and it'll tell you all the judges you're working with along with their phone numbers. The reason we give you each other's phone numbers is so that you can get together, right, and try to figure out how you're going to check supplies the night before the election, and also to get situated for election day, right? You might want to say, okay, do you want to bring the coffee or do this or do that? Like, get organized, like not only as a precinct, but as, just friends or, getting together, being organized. I want you to look on the right-hand side. Those are important reminders, reminding you to be on time and to wear your badge and to take your oath of office and to make sure to sign in and out on your payroll, whether it's on the paper one and electronically so that your pay is not held up. And also on the right-hand corner, it talks about primary election voting rules. So please always remember that the party that you are working as an election judge, they do expect you to vote that way, in a primary election. Please look at page 4. There's other types of judges. So it talks about substitute judges. So you may not know this, but if you don't know it, I'm going to tell you. All of you in this room, your names appear before a circuit court judge at the Daly Center, and you are confirmed by that court, by the circuit court, and you're also protected by the circuit court. So with that comes some powers, right? Don't let them go to your head. But one of the powers is that if you do not have a full complement of 5 election judges, 5 is the number to remember. If you don't have 5 judges, you have the right. It doesn't mean you have to do this, but you do have the right to swear in a registered voter of that precinct to help you out on election day. Again, you don't have to do it. If your precinct is working with the amount that showed up, that's okay. But if you feel that you're struggling and you're really lacking, or you're having trouble keeping up with processing voters as they come in, you can try to cajole, to beg, to sweet talk somebody that comes in to vote to see if they're willing to do that, to serve as an election judge. If you do that, please make sure that you follow all those instructions that you see under that title, okay? So what you basically have to do is there is a swear-in oath of office that one of the judges that are present will give to that person and have them sign. You also in return have to call a number that's on the form, and you have to call in their name, their date of birth, and their social security number. And we will run a quick cross-check on that person. If there's not a problem, you won't hear from us. But if there is a problem, we'll send out a field investigator to deal with the scenario, okay? But again, don't just say, okay, we swear you in and let's start working. You have to follow those specific instructions. Let's look where it says standby judges. So we have teams of standbys. We usually send them out in 2s, right, in a team. And they come along with a driver. We treat it like an emergency room triage, right? So we have some precincts, because don't forget that we have 2,069 precincts throughout the city of Chicago. But we have some precincts that are way more needy than others. And they may be needy because nobody showed up, or maybe only 1 or 2 people showed up. So that's like a triage, right? Like in a hospital room, they're going to take the people that had a heart attack over the person that has a stomach ache, you know, or something like that. So we treat the emergency people first, and then we'll try to get to the ones that are not that much in need. And please look where it says student judges. So by law, we are allowed to have high school juniors and seniors partake in the election by working as election judges. So we lift the voter registration requirement. And as long as they maintain a specific grade point average and have the consent of their guardian as well as their principal, they can serve. Now, ladies and gentlemen, other than just being younger than you, they're no different. So please do not treat them differently. They get the same pay, they do the same work, and they work the same hours, right? So nothing is really different other than them being a little bit younger than you. So please do remember that. But if you see important on the bottom of that segment, it does explain that they cannot return the supplies. So that's a legislative order that no high school junior or senior may be permitted to return those 2 roller bags, and you'll see them at the very end. They're not permitted to do that. Please turn to page 5. We have the same program about lifting voter registration requirements for college student judges. So you may have a college student here from California or Michigan or what have you, and they may maintain that residence there and their registration. However, they go to school here, so if they're interested in serving the polls, we allow that, and we'll lift the voter registration requirement. Let's talk about bilingual election judges. So bilingual election judges. So in Chicago, we have to have things available to these people that speak these languages: English, Spanish, Chinese, Hindi, Korean, and Tagalog. So those are the 6 languages that we have to be in compliance with. And when I say in compliance with, if we have forms that voters need to fill out, they have to be, they have to be in those languages as well. They have to be translated. Also, we will want poll workers that speak those languages in those precincts so that they can interact and communicate with the voters. Now, that's not all a bilingual judge does. They do everything. They're not just there for translation, okay? So now, there is a very specific envelope that you have. So when you look in your election supply carrier, you're going to find different type of envelopes. Envelope number 1, envelope number 2, 3, 4. But envelope number 3, that's the envelope that will have the translated forms in them as well as the English forms. So please, please make sure that if you have forms that are translated in those languages in that envelope, that they are front and center at your station number 1. They must be, so that people that walk in and they speak those languages or read it better than English, they know that they can fill out those particular forms and maybe comprehend or understand them better. So that is a law. Now, every single precinct, like English and Spanish is translated in every precinct, but not the other ones that I mentioned. They're only in very specific precincts where we have those voters that speak those languages, so that's how that goes. Alrighty, so I want you to look on page 5, kind of in the center, where it says understanding your responsibilities as an election judge. Number 1, it says conduct a fair and proper election. And you really don't have a point, you don't have a choice, do you? You take an oath of office that says you're going to do a good job. And you will conduct a fair and a proper election if you follow this handbook. So please just don't start making up your own election laws. You can't do that. So in this handbook, and it's a pretty big handbook, there are Illinois state election laws as well as federal election laws. States can make up their own election laws, but when there's a federal law that's in effect, that means the entire country has to abide by it. So again, that's what we're doing on election day. I want you to look where it says important. Don't wait until after the election to report a problem. And that's pretty serious, and I'll tell you why. We have 14,000 poll workers, so you're going to have some people that aren't going to get along on election day, which is uncalled for, but in reality it happens. But don't wait until after the election to report a problem, because on election day we have field investigators who are out there, and they can witness such activity from a person, and they can also make a report out, and they can report back to the election authority. So remember I said you are all commissioned by the court? That means you're protected by the court, but the court is the only one that can remove you. So if there's an issue going on election day, we need the report, and we need our 3 commissioners to sign off on that removal of an election judge, and then it has to be brought to the Daily Center where the judge who's in charge on that day for the election will sign off for the removal. And an investigator will go there and physically remove the individual. So if anybody is acting inappropriately, if anybody is not following blatantly disrespecting the procedures, or they're under the influence of anything, that's not permitted on election day. So please make sure that, let us know on election day. If not, we have to have a show cause hearing after the event. And then you're gonna have to get subpoenaed and come to hearings, and we could do all that on election day, okay? I want you to look at number 2, provide quality customer service to all voters. So all of you right now, you look pretty good, but I want you to put a smile on your face. Let's practice smiling. I don't care if you smile with your teeth or with your lips. Either one I'll take. And I'll tell you why. Because you can't tell me that doesn't make you feel better. And it will also make the voter feel better. And that's just the beginning of quality customer service, right? Get in the habit of putting a smile on your face and greeting voters, with a nice smile, warm smile, and then it'll go from there. I want you to look at number 3 and number 4. You are also responsible as an election judge to do that. You're going to be managing your polling place from the time that you set it up, to the time that people are voting, to the time that you are collapsing all the voting equipment and packing up the room. Number 4, you're going to monitor the equipment, supplies, and space. So that happens all day long. You're going to make sure that the equipment is functioning properly and the supplies are on the up and up, and that the space, make sure things aren't moving and people are allowed to walk around and have room to navigate in that precinct. I want you to look at page 6. Number 5 says share election duties. So unfortunately, I do always have to read this segment because people interpret it differently. So let's read it. It says all judges, including the appointed, the substitute, the standby, the student, and the bilingual judges, they must share all responsibilities, right? That's it. They just share the different responsibilities. They rotate duty stations throughout the day. And then it says all decisions must be made by a majority vote of judges. And then in bold, we bolded this so that people understand and they comprehend. It says there is not a chief or head judge. All judges have the same authority. So there's nobody in charge. Although sometimes you encounter people that think they're in charge. So right there, it clearly states that they are not. You could be working with the high school judge, it's their very first election, and this gentleman, he may be working his 10th election. He doesn't have more power than the high school judge, and it says so right there. So it says rotate duty stations. These are the 3 different things that you're going to be doing throughout the voting hours. You may even do a 4th, because now we have an extra body. We eliminated a duty station that we had for many, many years. So at station number 1, you're going to have 2 election judges, 1 of each political party. And what they're going to be doing is they're going to be looking up voters in the electronic poll book and making sure that they're registered voters of that precinct. So they're processing the voter. Station number 2 only has 1 election judge, and that election judge is going to have all the ballots displayed on the table, along with some Sharpie markers and some privacy covers. And what they're going to do is they're going to initial the ballots, give the voter a quick demonstration on how to mark their ballot, and then show them into an empty voting booth. And also explain to them, make sure to bring it out to the ballot scanner, insert your ballot into the ballot scanner. That's what they do at station number 2. Station number 3 will be the ballot box. So pretty soon after we set up our equipment up here, you're going to see a big box with the ballot scanner on top of it. And that election judge is going to stand in close proximity. They're not going to be like right on top of it. They're going to give the voter some privacy by stepping back about 5 feet. And they're going to allow the voter to have some privacy while they insert their ballot. And then they read a screen on the ballot scanner that says whether or not their ballot was accepted. And if it wasn't accepted, why not? It'll tell them what the problem was. And then they will collect those Sharpie markers and the privacy screens. And then they'll give them an I voted wristband, you know, that they can display proudly after they vote. So those are the 3 different things that you'll be doing. But you may have an extra judge or 2. And that means those people may be greeting voters as they come in, or checking out the campaign-free zone, you know, making sure that the cones are not moving, those kind of things. You know, just monitoring the precinct. So that's what we have on number 5. Now and remember I said rotate those duty stations? You sometimes get election judges that say, well, no, we just do it this way. We're happy with just staying the same. Well, it's always that one judge that says that, right? It doesn't mean that's what the majority feel. So again, now you have a hiccup. Now you have a dispute where not everybody agrees. How do you resolve that? You vote on it. So if we have 5 election judges right here, we say all in favor of rotating duty stations right now, say aye. So these 3 say aye. Just say all in favor of not rotating duty stations, say nay. These 2 say nay. Well, guess who won? These 3, right? Because those 2 were overvoted. So it's the majority rule. So that's always a very nice and professional way to resolve issues in your precinct polling place on election day. Alrighty, so let's look at number 6 on page 6. Keep the polling place open during the assigned hours. What time do our polls open? 6 o'clock. What time do they close? 7. Yeah, nobody ever gets that wrong. So yes, the polls open at 6 a.m. and they close at 7 p.m. What time must you be there? 5 o'clock, yeah. 5 o'clock is very critical. Anybody who is affiliated with the election world has to be at their post by 5 o'clock. If you are assigned an election central at the Board of Elections, you have to be there at 5. If you are a field investigator, you have to be at your roll call at 5. We all have to be where we need to be at 5. So just suck it up, set your alarm clocks, have other judges call each other. We don't care. Just be on time. Now, those hours are very specific, and let me tell you why. That's what the law says. No voter can be disenfranchised. Every voter should have the ability to cast a ballot between the hours of 6 a.m. and 7 p.m. No ands, no ifs, no buts. You don't put a sign up on your window that says out to lunch, be back in an hour, right? You can't do that. One judge can be gone at a time for a reasonable amount of time. What's reasonable to me? Nothing. Okay, you have to get up and stretch your legs, right? You want to go for a little walk around the block because you're falling asleep. That's acceptable. Oh, you're a smoker. Go out, smoke a cigarette, get your butt back in there. But anything beyond that is not acceptable because you can vote early. If you're not working in your home precinct, you had the ability to vote by mail or to vote at an early voting location. Also, you know that you have to bring your food, so pack your lunch ahead of time and bring your meds and things like that, right? So again, like don't abuse that, like being away, because other people are picking up your workload. And also, if you do not open on time, let's say that it's even out of your power. Let's say the person that is supposed to open the building was late. They come pulling up like a maniac, right, in their car at 5:45, but the polls had to be open by 6, right? So you're gonna have to use your brain. You're gonna have to use your moxie. What will make this precinct open? I'll tell you. Hurry up and set up your electronic poll book, but in the meantime, get out a poll sheet of all the registered voters. You'll find it in your envelope number 1. Take out all your ballots and put them out on your table with the privacy markers and, you know, whatever. Also, you will want to put up your ballot scanner. All the rest of the stuff can wait. This way you will not be disenfranchising voters. Now, after that line subsides, then go back and put up the rest of the voting booths. Then go back and hang up the signs. You see what I'm saying? If you ever disenfranchise a voter and we see and the court finds that a lot of people were inconvenienced or just enough, they may say you have to stay open later than 7 o'clock to accommodate those voters that you turned away. And we don't ever want that happening. So please, please do everything within your power to not turn away voters. All right, number 7, maintain a campaign-free zone. So every polling location will receive 2 of these cones that say no electioneering beyond this point, okay? So that's where you'll establish. So let's pretend here is our campaign-free zone. And also to measure out that zone, you receive on this piece of cardboard string that's measured out at exactly 100 feet. So you will always start counting your string from the doorway in which the voting is taking place, okay? And we're not going to figure that out tonight, are we? You're going to figure it out on the night before the election when you check supplies or on election morning. So I want you to look in the right-hand side that you see that boxed area. It tells you how to put out the cones. So if you're in a specific type structure, like a school or a church, you're not allowed to have the cones in the interior of that building. Even if the string lands within the building, you're not permitted to keep them in the building. You have to bring them right out to the front door. Now, the proprietor, the person in charge of that area or that building or that church or school, they can go so far as to say, we don't want this on our property at all. And if they say that, you don't have to ask, but if they bring that to your attention, then you have to bring it out to the public walkway. So it all depends on what type of structure you're in, and then it'll tell you right there. If you're in this building, put your cones like this. If you're in this situation, then put them like that. So again, you can figure that out the night before the election. But let's talk about the campaign-free zone. What happens on the campaign-free zone is that once you have the cones, and you always put them in the pathways that the voters are using the most, right? So if you're on this side of the cone, she can talk about politics. He can talk about a proposition or an opposition. This gentleman can be talking about political parties and campaigns. This woman can be passing out palm cards saying, here, please don't forget to vote for Laura for mayor. Here, this. They can do all that on this side. But once they cross this zone, nothing, nada, zilch. Nobody can talk about candidates, political parties, propositions, oppositions. Not only is it verbal, right, electioneering, it's also visual. So people cannot have on political paraphernalia, hats, t-shirts, buttons, or those palm cards that they were handed by poll watchers, right here, vote for my candidate. People can bring in voting aids. They certainly can, right? It'll help them remember names of candidates they want to vote for, but they have to bring them out in the privacy of their voting booth. They can't just walk around the precinct with them, right, like showing. So when people do that, please remember that they are not educated on laws. You are. You're sitting through a 4-hour training class. Most people don't do that much homework and read the entire election code. So it's up to you, right? Because you monitor the precinct, you're a poll worker. You would say, if this gentleman had a hat that said vote for Laura for mayor, I would just say, excuse me, sir, I'm very sorry, in a very polite manner. Sir, we have a campaign-free zone that we must make sure that, it remains campaign-free. So by you wearing that, you're infringing on that. So can we please just very kindly ask you to hide or take off your hat while you're voting here? And when you're finished voting and you cross those cones, you can certainly proudly display your hat again. We're very sorry for the inconvenience, but we appreciate it. So I explained it to him, right? I didn't just say, you can't have that hat on, because he would get offended, right? Like, who is she to tell me I can't have a hat on? But I'm explaining to him why. It's a campaign-free zone and we don't let anybody do it. Because then we might be accused of endorsing that candidate or protecting that party when in fact we're not. But it is our job to make sure it's removed so that we cannot be accused of that, okay? So you just explained it to people very professionally. All right, let's move on. We're going to look at page 7. You have a code of conduct that you must abide by. And I want you to look at the very first thing. The very first bullet point tells you to what? Be on time. So ladies and gentlemen, let's say it again. It tells you to what?
Be on time.
Be on time is critical. That's critical because we don't want a late opening, do we? Do we want to disenfranchise voters? Certainly not. So you must be on time. And also it puts you all in a good mood. You don't need just one of your election judges coming in at 6:30, 7, 8:30. That's not fair, is it? No. You're working your butt off and they just come waltzing in. Ooh, I got a great night's sleep. So don't do that. Don't tick off your fellow election judges. Be on time. It says be professional at the polling place. And then also there's a couple bullet points beneath that. It says the use of cell phones, the engaging of political discussions, the watching TV or working on, laptops or different devices. Please make sure that if there's one voter or 20 voters, they have nothing but your undivided attention. Nothing. So I'm going to explain how a lot of the precincts in the city of Chicago are. We have what we call combination polling places, which means we have more than one precinct within a room. So that's a combination. So you may be using a giant gymnasium of a Chicago public school, but because the gym is so big, we have one precinct in this corner, and then we have another precinct over in that corner. That's great, but that'd be nice if our judges actually monitored their voters. They don't. Every election, we get a call that says, we had a voter put their ballot in the wrong box. Well, how could that be? I'll tell you how it could be. They were not monitoring their precinct. So when a voter walks in, there's 5 of you, plus an election coordinator. In that other precinct, there's 5 election judges. That means 11 people dropped the ball and made a mistake, right? Why? Because they were talking, eating, playing on their cell phones. They weren't watching their voters. And they didn't give them clear instruction either. You vote here and you put your ballot here. But those voters more than likely were not told that. So you see the importance of monitoring your precinct. So make sure that you can use those devices, but not when voters are present, okay? Because that's how mistakes happen. It says be respectful, friendly, and helpful with voters, and I hope that you are. I hope you do everything within your power, your human power, to make their experience comfortable and be very helpful. I want you to look, and it says work in a cooperative way with all judges and any poll workers that you're working with on election day. You guys don't have to hook up after the election or get married, but you have to get along, right? It's a long day, but it's a short day because more than likely you won't even see each other again. Unless you're, taking on that responsibility for the next election or what have you. But you work cooperatively together. It says, remember, each voter has the right to a secret ballot. A secret ballot. We give people a privacy screen, a privacy cover, so they can hide their ballot from the time that they walk from their voting booth to the time that they walk to the ballot box. This way, things aren't displayed, who they voted for. Now, some people don't know how to use that privacy cover, right? You've showed them, but they're just walking out. And if you can see a person's ballot, don't look at it. Just turn your head away. And, don't have anybody accuse you of looking at their ballot. But people do have a right to a secret ballot. And some other people love to tell you who they voted for. But again, we have to offer them that privacy. It says, use the electronic poll book and other paper records and everything that you have in your possession. Use it for looking up voters. That's all. So you have an electronic poll book where you have access to a lot of information. So you are not entitled to use it as a stalking device, right? Looking up ex-lovers or people who owe you money. That's not allowed, it's not permitted. And you do have to log in and out of the poll book so we know the user who is using that, okay? So that's why when you are using your poll books, it's critical to log yourself out and then have the new user log themselves back in. And then it goes on from there to just say, follow the instructions in the handbook and what you learn in class and what you'll see on your poll book screen. It'll tell you how to process voters, okay? That brings us over to page 8, election coordinators. So we try to put one election coordinator in every single precinct throughout the city of Chicago. And we also, if we're not able to put one in every precinct, an election coordinator may have to watch more than one precinct. And that's exactly what they do, hence their title, coordinator. They're supposed to coordinate the events of the precinct. So when you guys check the supplies the night before the election, they should be there as well, coordinating, going through the supply list with you. Same thing goes for processing voters, making sure that you guys are checking in voters appropriately and filling out affidavits when needed. They're also supposed to help you set up all the equipment, right? So that, and let's be honest, we do have some precincts or some poll workers who are not able to do some of these things, right? Either physically or they struggle, like maybe sometimes understanding. So that's why these people are there. You guys are appointed by the party and circuit court, so there are specific jobs that you must do. Now there are some things because of that law and because of the election code that they cannot do. So it's not that we don't trust them to do it, they just are not allowed to by law. So one of the things, well, if you look, we do have standby teams as well. So we have, not teams, but we have standby election coordinators. So if one doesn't show up to your precinct or location, we can dispatch one out. I want you to look on page 9, understanding not your responsibilities, but their responsibilities as an election coordinator. So we do want them to do very specific things, like they must pick up the key and the wire cutters the weekend before the election. They must serve any precinct that they're assigned to. They are not permitted to ever leave that precinct polling place. So they must already have voted and they must bring in their foods and their beverages, okay, because they cannot leave. There's also the voter registration table that you see to my left, but your right. That voter registration table, that's where people will be registering to vote for election day because we have same-day registration. So anytime a person needs to register because they've never been registered or they change their name or their address, those are 3 reasons why a person would need to visit that registration table. So we don't sometimes have the luxury of having the time to cover registration with our classes, but we do with them. So a lot of times they will be the primary registrar on election day. But if they see that you are very competent and good at using the electronic poll book, they may give that job to you. They may say, well, you know, I'm going to have you register people over there at the registration table. Also, they're going to troubleshoot the equipment. If there's any problems, maybe the paper gets jammed, you know, while you're printing results tapes or you run out of paper on the printer for the touchscreen, they can replace it. So they can do some troubleshooting as well on the equipment. I want you to look on page 9 in the top right-hand corner. It tells you things that they're not permitted to do. And again, this has to be a party-affiliated election judge who is sworn by the court. They cannot serve as an election judge. They can't say, oh, I'm in over my head. I think I'm just going to be one of you. They can't do that. They can't initial paper ballots or verify voter signatures that appear on the screen. They can't make decisions on challenges or sign affidavits or totals tapes, or they can't sign any of the closing forms or envelopes. And they certainly may not return the supplies to the receiving station, okay? I do want you to look at page 10 in the top right-hand corner. Here is another task that we want them to do. And on the top right-hand side, you're going to see a Form 21 ADA. It's a checkoff list. And there's also right next to it an accessibility guide. So the guide is like this. It's explaining what has to be done within a precinct polling place. So every polling location has to have a 36-inch walkway. That means from the time that a person is checking in with the 2 election judges, they have to have a 36-inch path to navigate and walk around. And also 36 inches to walk to a voting booth where they will cast their ballot privately. And then also 36-inch pathway to get to the ballot scanner where they're going to deposit their ballot. That's great. But now also, there has to be a 60-inch parameter in the lowered voting booth as well as the touchscreen. So there is this measuring device, and it's a big circle that you're going to see your lowered voting booth right here, right? So this lowered voting booth is used for people who sometimes, if they can't stand for a long length of time, they can sit and they can mark their ballot by using this as a tabletop, right? But if there's a person with a scooter or a wheelchair or a walker, this can be removed. But you have to measure out the distance right here. So this circle would be laid out on the floor, and then you would measure to make sure that that device, meaning that wheelchair or that walker, is able to roll into this unit, but then be able to turn around, right? You do not leave this measuring device on the floor. You will lift it up and put it back inside the election supply carrier so that it's not a tripping hazard, okay? But that has to be done. And guess what? If there are things in the way, like that chair, well, guess what? You have to move it. Or maybe if there's not that much room, you may have to start taking down some of those taller voting booths because we have to be in compliance. This circle will also be laid out in front of the touchscreen. So the touchscreen, the same rules apply. You must make sure that there is enough space between, like the touchscreen voting booth as well. So once you set up your touchscreen, you'll lay that circle down as well to make sure that a wheelchair or scooter or any of those devices can navigate and turn themselves around to exit. There's going to be a checkoff list. So the checkoff list, we will make a check mark if they need to comply with the change, right? So not all of our precincts are 100% accessible, but we want them to be. So there may be some temporary remedies that the election coordinator can do to make it as accessible as possible. So just to give you a for instance, some of the Chicago public schools have, let's say, water fountains, right? They jut out from the wall. But if a person is blind or visually impaired and they have their stick, they may not know it's there, right, because it juts out, but it doesn't go all the way to the ground, and they may trip over it. But the election coordinator may have to put something, and I'm just using the cone as a for instance, they may have to put something underneath it so that when the person does hit it with their cane, they know to walk around it, right, so there's not a tripping hazard. So again, if there's a check mark on the form, they have to do it. If there's not a check mark, they don't have to do it. It's already in compliance. And they have to sign off on that sheet and make sure that it comes back in the black roller bag. Even though they don't return it, it has to be in that black roller bag, okay? So that's something that we want them to do. So you can read at your leisure a little bit more slowly than I'm talking about what election coordinators are there to do and help you accomplish. Let's move on to page 11, monitoring visitors at the polling place. So there's going to be visitors at your precinct. Why? Because we have an open and fair and impartial election process. Anybody that's interested in the election for whatever reason, they have the ability to witness the election from the time you set it up to the time you close and walk out the door. And it proves to people that we're not hiding anything. The election is being run fairly, okay? But we still have to know who is in the precinct, right? If there's a mishap that happens, we know who's accountable. So the first people that you see mentioned are Board of Election field investigators or agents. So those are Chicago police officers and Cook County sheriffs that we hire for that day. And they monitor the precincts throughout all the voting hours. If there's a complaint on the precinct, they go out there and they'll address it or take a report. They may just pop their heads in to say, how you guys doing? And the Board of Election field investigator, there is a sign-in sheet in the envelope number 1, so the field investigator has to sign in and out all day long, right? Sometimes they forget, they may be called on a different job and forget, so please do always remind them if they forget that they do have to sign in and out on that sheet. I want you to look where it says Equip for Equality. So that is an organization that looks out for the rights of people with disabilities. They'll even protect them in court and all kinds of things. So they have the right to come into our precinct polling places to make sure that the precincts are accessible to those people with disabilities. So they will even have the power to rearrange your furniture to make it accessible. So don't let that happen. Don't put more work on them or yourselves, and please do try to set it up correctly in the first place. Those two people, along with the other government officials, they will just show you their identification. They don't surrender it to you. They just show it to you. But if you look, the other government officials, who gets a visit from an assistant state's attorney on election day? Raise your hand. All of you should raise your hand because they visit every polling place. So if you worked in the last election, the assistant state's attorneys visit almost every single precinct in the city of Chicago. But do know that all of them are welcome, and they will show you their identification from their office, from their government office. I want you to look on page 12, and it talks about media and exit pollsters. So the media are certainly allowed in the precincts, and that's how we know what's going on in the world, right? By turning on the TV or radio, or we have all kinds of things, bloggers and social media. Anyway, the media are certainly allowed, and they can film you, and they can also interview people and ask them who they voted for on the way out of voting. But please make sure that they do have a media credential, and they will surrender such credential. They don't get it back. So the investigators and Equip for Equality just show you their identification, but the media, they'll surrender it to you, and you put it in this 47E envelope, okay? They don't get it back. Now, if they do not have a media credential, just call Election Central. Have them quickly stop what they're doing and just say, let us check and make sure that it's okay that you stay here. But we are very generous by giving out a lot of media credentials to the media. Please look where it says poll watchers. So poll watchers are just that. They're poll watchers, not poll touchers. They can't touch anything in the precinct. You can't say, oh, by the way, sir, can you come over here and help me set up this ballot scanner? They can't touch the voting equipment, nor can they go through your paperwork that's at your voter check-in table. They are there to observe, and the reason they're sent there is for different reasons. They may be endorsing a particular candidate, so they'll have a candidate credential. They may be endorsing a political party, so therefore they may be sent by the Democrats or the Republicans, or they may be representing a qualified civic or citizen organization, in which organizations like the Rainbow Push Coalition or the League of Women Voters, they also will monitor the precincts to make sure everything's on the up and up, okay? So that's all great, right? And you have to also know what they can and can't do. So poll watchers are allowed to stay up until the close of the polls and even get an election results tape. They can even stand so close behind your voter check-in table just like this and stand or sit close enough to observe the signatures that are shown on that poll book screen. So those are all things that they can do. And they can come and go all day long, and all they have to do is surrender one credential. But they do have to surrender a credential to each precinct that they want to witness or look at, even if they're only going to stay for like a minute or two, okay? And they don't get those credentials back. They're put in the 47E envelope. So if you'd like to see what the credentials look like, you can certainly turn to page 14. And on the left-hand side, you're going to see the various credentials that you may be given on election day. Please make sure that they're completed, because the segment does say that the credentials must be completed. Don't just let them sign their name and that's it. They didn't put their name or their address or who they're watching for. It does say very specifically that they must be completed, and if they're not, again, just politely explain that our handbook says they must be completed, so therefore we have to turn these back over to you so you can complete them, and then we'll welcome you. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember, poll watchers have every legal right to be there, just like voters and just like you. So you do not own the precinct, so don't get like very territorial. Think of the election as a play. We all have a different role in the play, don't we? Yes. There's voters, poll watchers, and candidates and political parties and what have you. So we all have a legal right to the election. I want you to look on the right-hand side. You're going to see the field investigator credential as well as Equip for Equality, and they're just going to show you those IDs. Remember, they're not going to surrender them. That brings us over to page 15, understanding the voting equipment. Well, because you're going to be monitoring and working with the voting equipment, you certainly need to know how it works. So I want you to look on the left-hand side where you see the 2 electronic poll books. So this election, we are going to be using new voting equipment. I don't know if you know that yet, but if you don't, you do now. But the poll books themselves are not new, but there are some new enhancements to them. So the electronic poll books you see on your tables, they now have the ability to activate a card if a person wants to vote on the touchscreen. So if you're looking at your electronic poll book, on the right-hand side, you are going to see a yellow kind of piece of tape, and that's where the card reader slot is, and that's where you will insert a card if the person wants to vote on the touchscreen, okay? Also, you will no longer have a keyboard at the voter check-in table. There will only be a keyboard at the voter registration table because they do much more data entry, right? So you just do a couple peckin', right? Like you just usually use the 2-1 lookup method when you're looking up voters. So it doesn't really require a keyboard. So that's a little bit different from the last election, but you still do have 2 poll books, one for the voter check-in table and one for the registration table. I want you to look at the voting equipment on the center, on the bottom, you'll see a picture. And what the picture is this right here. It's our new ballot scanner. So it's a little bit skinnier. It works just as hard, right? It scans and it looks at and it retrieves votes that people mark on their paper ballot, and it stores the votes on memory cards that are already inserted in the unit. So that's the ballot scanner. But if you look to the right-hand side on page 15, you're going to see a ballot box. And same thing like the last elections, you build the ballot box and you put the scanner on top of it. And you certainly make sure to lock it down with all the seals so that people don't have access to the completed, voted on ballots that fall into that ballot box. So that's the same concept. However, the box looks a little bit different. It's not as square, it's a little bit more rectangular than the former boxes that we used for the election. And I want you to turn to page 16. And you're going to see our new touchscreen voting unit along with a printer and a table and a new privacy screen. So everything you see right there is brand spanking new. Now the touchscreen itself, unlike our last touchscreen, it does not store any votes. It's just a marking device, right? It's like a giant tablet. And what a person does that uses the touchscreen, they mark their ballot by touching the screen, right, choosing the candidates, and then they tap print ballot. Once they tap print ballot, it's going to be printed on the printer that you put right next to it. And then that ballot will be brought and placed into the ballot scanner. So all ballots that are counted on election day will go through the scanner, whether people are given a paper ballot at station number 2 or they're given the card to vote on the touchscreen. Now this touchscreen, we are still in compliance with the Help America Vote Act because this particular unit has the handheld device. So we have the handheld device, right, the paddle, that a person can plug in their audio headset or their sip and puff device, right? So again, that still has that, although it looks a little bit different. But we're still in compliance by having that. Also, anybody can use the touchscreen, but anybody that needs to use it on account of the audio capability or the sip and puff certainly have first priority to the equipment, okay? So that hasn't changed either. That brings us over to the next chapter. The next chapter is chapter number 4, and that talks about checking the election supplies before election day. Who is responsible for doing that? Everybody. Because remember what our statement said? Nobody's in charge. Nobody has more authority than the other person. So everybody is responsible for getting to that precinct polling place the night before the election. You know how we have Christmas Eve? Let's call this Election Eve, right? So on Election Eve, we can get excited and we can get some jobs done just like we do on Christmas Eve, okay? So what you want to do, you want to call one another and say, what's a good time and when can we all get there? So the first thing you're going to do is find the big election supply carrier and make sure it's the correct one. And you will find your precinct and ward right there, okay? And so it's not going to say training like our training one, but it'll say your specific precinct and ward. I want you to look on page 18 and you are going to see the items that will help you get into that piece of equipment. You're going to see the wire, the wire cutters, the key, and you'll see a seal that's, between the two holes there by the door. But in the right-hand side, you're going to see what we call a seal accountability form. So let's open this up, right? So we would break off the seal, and we'd hold on to it, and we'd put our key in the door and then press the button, and that will allow us entry into the election supply carrier. Here is where you're going to find your supply list and your seal accountability form. So you're also going to find an unused seal bag, and you're going to find a broken seal bag. So the seal you just broke off, right? You're going to have to verify the number by looking at that sheet, and you're going to put your initials there if the numbers match. If they don't, you always call equipment and supply, but they should match, of course. So when you leave the precinct, after you're done checking your supplies, what you're going to do is you're going to go into the unused seal bag and take the very same type of seal, and you're going to record the number and then lock it up and go home and get a good night's sleep, okay? If you look on page 19, you're going to see the supply list, and the supply list will also be in the door. So you don't have to use that little one because you'd have to get a magnifier, right? I can't even see those words. But it's just letting you know that there is a supply list in that door as well, in that sleeve. But if you turn to page 20, you are going to see how we situate and how we load up that entire election supply carrier. Now, does anybody know when that picture is also very, very helpful? When it's time to leave. So people are trying to stuff things like right in companies coming over and you go in your closet and you're shoving stuff. You don't have to do that. You can go back and look and see where it fits comfortably, okay? Now, to answer this wonderful judge's question, what can we do the night before the election? We're going to talk about it right now. So look on page 21. Even though this says setting up the polling place on election day, there are some things that we can do that we're permitted within the law to set up the night before the election. So you have to look at those 18 different things and figure out, is this critical or is it not critical, right? Or is it allowed by law or isn't it? Number 1 says check the polling place for a portable ramp. Portable ramps, they do happen, but they're very rare. Because let's say there's a 1-stair or 2-stair impediment in a precinct, and a person can't, if they're in a walker or wheelchair, be able to get in, we will do a ramp. But if it's anything above like 1 or 2 stairs, you can't, because it'd be like an Evel Knievel ramp, right? That would be super dangerous, at that incline. So you can check that the night before or the day of, because sometimes they're also delivered the day of. I want you to look at number 2. It says open up the election supply carrier. You can certainly do that. Place out the American flag. Heck no. People steal things like crazy, right? So put that out the night of the election, right? And then it says find and arrange the furniture. You can certainly do that. You can go ahead and look at that supply list and take out all your voting booths that are normally stored right here in the bottom left-hand corner, and you can set up the lowered voting booth, the metal ones, the plastic ones. You can pull out the table and set up the whole registration table. So you can do all that. You can run your extension cords. You can find where you'd like your voter check-in table to be and set it up. And then it says you don't need to sign the oath of office, number 5. Wait for election morning. Same thing with the coordinator for number 6. Number 7, set up the campaign-free zone. Again, those cones like to walk away, don't they? People, I've seen them saving parking spots after people shovel. So we don't want them to disappear, right? We have enough expense with the city of Chicago. So what you're going to do, you can measure it out. You can take the string and you can measure it out, but just visualize where they landed. So this way, then you can just plop the cones down on election morning. So let's see what else. Set up the electronic poll books. You cannot do that. Number 9, assemble the metal voting booths. And number 10, the plastic and the lowered. I already said yes, you can do that. Number 12, arrange and connect all the voting booths. You can certainly do that with the electricity. And assemble the ballot box for the ballot box scanner. Wait till election morning. Same thing with number 14. Number 15, you have to wait till election morning. Step number 16, pass till election morning. 17, you can certainly do. 17 says hang up all your voting signs. So you have these very specific envelopes, right? Envelope number 1 says open me first. But this is where you'll find all your check-in information. You're going to find your payroll. You're going to find your oaths of office. You're going to find the investigator sign-in sheet. You're going to find your ballot packing sheet because we tell you how many ballots we deliver to your precinct, and you'll need those numbers for the close of the polls. So envelope number 1's not very helpful the night before the election, but this one certainly is. It says open this envelope and post all these signs before 6 a.m. So we have our signs already posted on the wall here, but you always want to put the signs where they're the most visible to voters, especially your accessibility entrances. If you have an entrance that is accessible that's not the main entrance, you need to put those posters and signs accordingly so they're not inconvenienced and don't have to keep going in circles trying to figure out the right door, okay? Those are all the things you can do the night before the election. Now those things take way more time than the setup of the equipment. I promise you they do. So on election morning is when you'll set up the poll books, the ballot scanner, the touchscreen, and the printer. Okay, so poll watchers have the right to also watch you do that to prove that there's no votes on any of the equipment. So again, you have to respect that, okay? You can't tamper with any of that. That brings us over to page 23, and those are suggested polling place arrangements. So if you look at that picture, at the very first picture, you're going to see just a single precinct, right? There's no other precincts involved within that room. So that's a nice recommendation on how to set up so voters have privacy and they're able to navigate around the room comfortably, especially for people with disabilities. I want you to look at the lower picture, and that's a combination polling place. That's a room in which you have 2 precincts in the very same room. So that also gives you an idea on how to set it up, and also to always remember that you want your voters putting their ballots in your ballot scanner, not the other precincts. Okay, that's critical. That brings us over to page 24. So number 5, on election morning, that's when you're going to do these things, right? You're going to go into that envelope number 1 and take your oath of office and sign in on your payroll. And so is the election coordinator at number 6. And number 7, you're going to put the cones out, and number next number, you're going to put out the flag. Now, before we go on to setting up the equipment on page 25, I'm going to show you the election supply carrier right here, right? So it's empty, right? Because we have all of our supplies out already. But I always must remind you of an emergency ballot box. Voting never stops, even in a crisis, right? If the lights go out or whatever, we'll vote by candle and candlelight and flashlights if need be. However, if the ballot scanner is not working, the ballot scanner does have a 2-hour backup battery, but in the event that it quits working for another reason, you always have this emergency ballot box. So a voter can put their ballot, not their privacy screen, but their ballot in here, and it's locked and sealed, right? We only do that in an emergency if the ballot scanner quit working. So you would obtain an orange seal and record it, and whatever ballots are in here, they would have to stay locked and sealed until the polls close, right? So it is unlawful for you to handle any ballots that are live voted on ballots until after the polls close, okay? So I just always like to bring that to your attention because we get so excited with our training that sometimes I forget to talk about it. So I didn't want to forget it. So ladies and gentlemen, that is the introduction and checking your supplies and doing all that fun stuff. We are now going to go on to page 25. And the very first piece of equipment that you are supposed to set up are your 2 electronic poll books, and you run your update. So I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to invite Geneva to do this segment.